Hello everybody, Tommy Ruin here and welcome back to another video. This video, and for most videos in the near future, I think we're going to be checking out the Burning Crusade Alpha because there is a lot going on there, a lot to test, a lot to see, and it's coming out in a few months' time, so we need to be ready for that. So this video is going over a build I recently stumbled across after looking through some of the new random enchants that have been added to the game. And if you don't know already, they're completely changing the random enchant system that is in the game, and they're adding so many new legendaries, they're adding loads of epics and loads of new green ones, and also taking away some of the very high performing old ones. So there's a big shake up in the random enchant scene, and I've been checking that out recently. But in the last wave of random enchants that were added, there are a few which synergize between different skills, and a lot of these are completely useless. There's no synergy and it doesn't really work, but for this one in particular, and I'll explain what it is in a minute, the damage increase was huge, so it seemed to be definitely worth picking up. So what I ended up doing was stacking a few of these new random enchants that increased the damage of Wrath, a druid spell, when there was debuffs applied to the target. So the ones that I used were Shadow Word Pain and Rip. So Shadow Word Pain, there was a random enchant that increased the damage of Rip by 4%, so stacking that 3 times, it was a 12% damage increase. And with Rip, if Rip was on the target, your Wrath gained 15% increased damage, so 45% increased damage if there was a Rip on the target. Now, as I showed you in the Boomkin video I made, there is the talent Eclipse, and when you're in a solar eclipse, you get 50% increased damage on Wrath. So with all those talents put together, that's an 107% damage increase on Wrath. So double damage plus a little bit extra. When you stack that with cooldowns, of course, you get an even higher damage number. And I was throwing out something like 10 to 11k crits with Wrath, which doesn't sound like much on Legacy, but on TBC that's pretty high. And it's quite fun to be shifting into cat form, applying Rip, applying Shadow Word Pain, and then throwing out some fast Wraths. Now what I did realise as I was testing this build was that to cast Wrath during the lunar eclipse was actually a DPS loss, so I still carried on with my Starfires, and what that meant was I didn't have to apply Rip and Shadow Word Pain, which generally, like over the whole build, the damage percentage that those did was very low. So the synergy there is quite bad in terms that the damage that you get from those abilities is just to increase the damage of your Wrath. You're not actually gaining anything from putting those on the target apart from a massive damage increase in your Wrath, which doesn't necessarily feel good. It feels just like pressing something like Hunger for Blood or that druid ability, I think it's called Savage Roar, that gives you a 30% damage increase just because you press the button. They're not fun, but because you could stack so much damage increase, you can get Wrath to do insane numbers, which, to be fair, was fun. But if there was a way that you could synergize it and make it so that your Rip and your Shadow Word Pain played more into the build and they were doing more damage, I think that would be more fun. But in this case, I was literally just using them to increase the damage of my Wrath. So what I would do, I would start by getting into a solar eclipse. I would apply Rip, and the way I did this, I didn't want to spend any time in cat form because it was just a waste of damage. So I got Honor Amongst Thieves, which generates combo points when I use spells or abilities. And once I'd used a Starfire to open up on the target, I generated a combo point. So I shifted into cat form, and I took the talents that would reduce the shapeshifting cost, so I wasn't constantly losing mana like that. And because I had a combo point, I could rip the target straight away. I'd come out, I'd use Shadow Word Pain, and then I'd start wrathing. And my Wrath then has the increased 107% damage because I'm in a solar eclipse. And that feels really good. And if you've got a lot of haste, you're like a little Wrath cannon, and you're firing off these Wraths so fast. What was interesting about this build is you kind of switch off for 15 seconds while you're in your lunar eclipse. You can set up things, you can reapply your dots, and you can get mana back, and then as soon as you go back into the Wrath phase, you're doing some crazy damage once again, hitting those 10k crits and 6 to 7k normal hits with Wrath. It feels really fun to play. Do I think this build will make it into the live game? Absolutely not. I think the 15% damage increase is very high, and although this build wasn't putting out massive damage, I was doing about 3.5k to 4k damage in Karazhan gear, it probably isn't what they want us to be doing, but we'll see. I might be wrong. They might put this in and they might do this for other spells, but it's an interesting one. So some problems I had with this build whilst playing, I tested it in a heroic dungeon in dungeon gear, and I was doing like 2.5 to 3k DPS. But a lot of mobs I found are bleed immune, and if there is a bleed immunity, you've lost 45% of your damage straight up because you can't apply your rip to the target, so you lose that 45% damage on the target. So that was a problem which I found. The other problem is you have to kind of act as a melee to be in range to use your rip. So some bosses, such as Omor the Unscarred, which is the demon boss at the end of Ramparts, he puts out a big curse on a player, and that has a massive radius, and if you're standing within the radius of the cursed player, then you take a lot of damage. So if you're standing in a melee group, you're going to be taking a lot of damage. So what I had to do, I had to go in and rip and then disengage out, do my wrath spam, and then when it came round to the next solar eclipse, I'd have to go back in and risk getting damage, and I was constantly flicking between the two. So it didn't feel fun to play in that regard because I had to really worry about being some kind of caster spec, but I was standing in melee, so you don't get the benefit of being a caster and being able to be agile. So the trade-off there I don't think is worth it. You're probably better just to go as a pure caster. But still, the hybrid side of things was quite fun. And to be honest, this is the kind of thing I'm looking for when we come to Ascension and TBC. And I think they are starting to get things right in terms of getting these synergies going. But there needs to be so much more support put in to support these things, because at the moment, like I said earlier, the only reason I'm pressing Rip and the only reason I'm pressing Shadow Word Pain is to increase the damage of my Wrath. I don't care if they do 0 damage, because the Wrath damage is what I care about. There's no way to synergize the damage that you're putting out to do high bleed damage and also high Wrath damage. You're just destroying one side or the other, rather than just focusing purely on doing the high spell damage that I was doing with Wrath. So that is what I've been testing out on the TBC Alpha. I've given you a brief overview of what I was using for this spec. It very much followed the Boomkin spec that I put out, which I'll put a link to in the description and the comments. So for talents wise, you can basically follow that, apart from a few extras such as the shapeshifting talents and Honor Amongst Thieves. So this is what I was looking at. I'm not going to do a full build overview because I don't think that's necessary, but I thought I'd showcase some of the cool synergies that I've been finding out, and hopefully we can see more of this in the future. But that's all from me. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all very soon.